Today on Pots and Trowels we're going to be pruning different types of hydrangeas, which is brought to you with the support of Cobra Garden, Darlac and Mr Fothergill's. Hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels. One of the questions that I'm very often asked is how do you prune hydrangeas? So I thought what we'd do today is just look at different types of hydrangea and give you a few tips on when is the best time to prune them so you get masses of flowers. And we're going to start with this one. This is called Hydrangea Macrophylla and it's the one that probably lots of people know. It's probably one of the most popular. It's the one that has the big pink heads or blue heads. They're either these big pom-poms like that or the lace cap type. And these are really, really lovely. They will flower from midsummer right the way through into autumn. In fact, my grandma used to grow these in her garden and she used to call them changeables for the simple reason that you can change the colour of the flower to a certain degree depending on the soil you're growing them in. If you've got acid soil, you'll get the blue flowers. If it's alkaline soil, you'll get pink flowers. So how do we prune them? Well, we can see here we've got the remains of last year's flower heads, and I always think it's important with this type of hydrangea that we leave the flower heads on. I think they look decorative right the way through the winter, and it just gives a little bit of protection to the buds below because these flower on the previous season's growth. So if we were to suddenly cut everything down to ground level, it wouldn't kill it, it would make masses of growth, but we'd get no flowers because it's these big buds just down the stem here that are now going to flower this year for us. So really what we do is more or less just deadhead, and we can see these big fat buds like that. So just a case of really going around with your secateurs and cutting down to these buds just like that, and then that will grow a short stalk and that will produce the flower for us later this summer. So I'm just going to go round just taking them down like that. If you think you've got one that's a little bit crowded, you could take it out altogether just to keep a nice open plant. And what I've obviously done here, last year I must have pruned something down because it's made this lovely long growth here that didn't flower last year because it's not got a flower head on it, but we see there's a big fat bud on the tip. Well, that is guaranteed to be a flower bud. So if you've got anything like that, we don't cut them down. So I'm just going to go over it very quickly, and it's more or less deadheading. Now the drawback with doing this every year is that the shrub will just get taller and taller and taller. So what we can do every now and again is to cut one or two of these branches a little bit further down into the shrub. So this one, for example, at the front is quite an old branch here. So I'm actually going to be a little bit ruthless and I'm going to cut that down to there. And you might think, oh, I'm cutting off flowers. Well, yes, I am, but I've still got lots and lots of flowers on everything that I'm leaving here. So I'm going to get a nice balance of new growth and flowers all the way through this summer, and then the new growth that it makes will flower next year. Likewise at the back here, I've got some really old wheat growth. So what I'm going to do is just cut some of these off right the way down to ground level. And you can cut about a quarter if you want to of these old stems down to ground level, take them away completely. And although it looks bare now, where I've cut these three off here, 1, 2, 3, we'll get lovely strong new shoots that will grow, and again they will then flower next year. And then what I'll do next year is probably cut one or two of the other old ones off. So within a 4-year period you are completely renewing all the growth on them. So there it is, just one there that I've missed, and that one there, and we are now all pruned, ready for flowers. So I'm going to show you some of the other types. Now this type of hydrangea here is one called Hydrangea Aspera. It's the Velosa group, and again this one flowers on last year's growth, the previous season's growth. Very different though. This one is very much upright like this, gets very woody in the bark, flakes, this lovely cinnamon coloured bark on there on the older growth which flakes off. So it's got quite attractive stems, but then the flower heads are flat. like a lace cap. So we get the white and mauve there, so they're white around the edge with mauve in the center. So these are obviously last year's flowers, and the pruning is very similar to Macrophylla. So basically what I'm going to do is to now take off all of these old flowers that flowered last year, just to cut them back like that, and then what will happen, this growth here will develop, and that will be the new flowering stems for this year. But like the other type of hydrangea, where they get a bit old and woody, it's just a good idea to go down and down at the base, just to cut one or two really hard back. Don't worry if you can't see a bud, because the nearest bud to the top of that will grow. And here again we've got some dead wood on it, so we would cut that out completely. This one looks a bit dead here. It's just what they do. So it's just a case of taking out any dead wood and just a little bit of thinning it out, just so that it encourages some nice new growth from lower down on there. And then we always get that mixture of old and new wood, some flowering, some not flowering. If we don't do that, it just gets really old and woody, and in no time will look a real mess. So very similar pruning to the other one, but just quite an unusual flower head when it does flower. There we go. So that's all pruned now. So another type of hydrangea over here is one that we prune really hard back, and this one is what we call Hydrangea arborescens. You might have heard of Annabelle. I've talked about it, we've shown you it before. It has those really big white flowers. Well, this is the pink form, pink Annabelle. Now these flower on the new wood. I've already started to prune this, but I've left these just to show you. And again, we can see the remains of last year's flower heads on there. I always leave them for the winter. They just look nice. It gives little hiding places to lacewings and insects in the garden. But what we do with these, this is 1 year's growth, believe it or not. They make about 4 feet of growth. The white one does exactly the same. So what we do at this time of the year, usually around about the middle of March is a good time, because hopefully the worst of the weather's gone. It's simply just a case of, and I'm just going to move those twigs out the front of Mrs. Fisher's camera. It's just a case of literally going in with the secateurs, and I'm cutting everything down to just 1 or 2 inches from ground level. You can't always see the buds, so again, don't worry too much about this, because what will happen is the bud nearest the top of that stem where we've pruned to will grow and make lots of new growth, and these will grow to about 4 feet by July, and then the flowers will form on this new growth. Now if you, when you're doing this, you find any obvious dead bits, you can tell the dead bits that are really dry, just trim those out as well, and take out any of the old leaves in there, just to get a bit of air into it, and that will become a mass of new growth in about a month, 6 weeks time, and we can look forward to those flowers. And one final one up the garden is closely related to this, but I'll just show you that because it's a slightly different technique. And finally, this is the other type of hydrangea. This is called a Hydrangea Paniculata. Now this one also flowers on the new wood, so all the growth it makes the first part of the season will flower usually a bit later, sort of August, September time these flower. And these produce lovely cone-shaped flowers. And this one here, this is a young plant that I haven't planted out into the garden yet, and you can see this is the remains. So instead of a round flower head, we've got these lovely cones on there, and they can be white, they can be a very pale green colour, there's one called limelight, or you can get them that are 2 colours, pink and white together. And this is a lovely one which is called Big Ben, and it has big flower heads. So we prune them hard back just like we do with Annabelle, but what we often do with these is to prune them back to a framework of older branches, so that then you get the older wood down the base, and then we get the new growth above it. So ideal if you want to put it further towards the back of a border, so you can then grow other things in the front that hide these bare stems. So I've already done this one. So what I would do with this one here is I would just prune it back to form that framework, I'm just cutting it back. So I'm not going right to ground level, if you notice with this one. I'm actually pruning it, so I've got maybe a foot of growth. These buds will grow, they will produce about 3 feet of growth, and then we will get the lovely flowers. So hopefully that explains it. The only one I haven't mentioned is one called Hydrangea Petiolaris, which is the climbing hydrangea that self-clings to walls and flowers late summer. And ideally that one doesn't really need much pruning. The more you prune that one, the less it will flower, so it's best to leave alone. But if it does produce flowers or stems that grow out from the wall and they're too big, you can shorten them back. And the time we would normally do that is after flowering, so not now at this time of the year. Wait until they've flowered, shorten some back, but don't shorten everything, because the buds on the tips of those stems that grow out from the wall are the ones that will flower next year. So it's again a balance, shortening a few, leaving some, so you've always got flowers and new growth. So hopefully that will help you when you come to prune your hydrangeas. Well, thank you for watching, and please do keep telling all your friends about us and get them to share it. Next week I'm going to be sowing some veg seeds in containers, so we'll see you then. Bye.